So, here's how it all works. Ready?
Good morning, church family. My heart is so warm this morning. I feel like I'm amongst my family, and this sermon series has been it's been unique, and it's been really special for me personally because I feel like all of us are on this journey together of following Jesus, and I feel like this sermon series has brought some things to the forefront in my own life that I had missed. And when we talk about following Jesus, I think the starting place is being with him, and then becoming like him, and then doing as he did. As I was thinking about this week, I couldn't help but think of my wife, Christy. Christy and I have been married for 17 years, and thank you. It's great. Okay. We started dating in October of 2004. I know I don't look that old, but it's true. Our freshman year of college. And there's something really special about falling in love. When you meet someone who is as love with you as you are with them, you cannot get enough of them. You want to be with them all the time. You want to be with them. And inevitably, because you're with them so much, they start to rub off on you, don't they? You start to become like them. And then you find yourself doing things that you never saw yourself doing before. I think if you were to find someone who knew Scott Mercer when I was 17, and they hadn't seen me since, I think if they were to meet me today, they would say, "You're nothing like the person I knew." And yes, Jesus has a lot to do with that, but Christy Mercer has a lot to do with that. And you have a lot to do with that, my family. And so there's something about the people we're around that shape us into the person that we are. You know, as I've meditated on this, I've thought about our first year of marriage. Can we shoot straight? It's a rough year, isn't it? I'm sure there's some of you out there that are much more spiritual than I am, but our first year of marriage was a rough year because our wills collided. What I wanted and what Christy wanted were two different things. For example, she wanted a dog, and I don't like dogs. I was bitten by two dogs as a teenager, and one of them was quite serious. And so, since my 16th year of life, I've been terrified of dogs. And I won't go into the story, but if I told you the story, you'd be like, okay, you're allowed to not like dogs. But my wife wanted a dog. And guys, you may imagine someone that doesn't like a dog. Maybe they don't let their spouse have a dog, or maybe they don't let their spouse let the dog on the couch. You may know of someone like this, but guys, I want to present before you someone who has surrendered my will to my wife, and I allow the dog on the couch. Would you guys see this? All right. If you weren't here earlier in the series, you missed the inside joke, just forget it. It's okay. Yeah, there's something about a husband and wife when the honeymoon is over where your wills collide. And if the couple is not saying to one another, not my will, but thine be done, there's going to be no unity in the marriage. In fact, marriage is a divine symbol. Humans were created as God's partners over creation, and marriage is the symbol given to us to show us the relationship that God wants with all humanity. As humans surrender their will to God, He is able to form them into the kind of people that represent Him properly in the world. But the problem in the story of the Bible is that over and over and over, humans rebelled against their Creator God. And so God chooses a nation for Himself, the nation of Israel, and He calls them His bride. He marries a nation. But what happened with this nation? They were unfaithful. They cheated on their groom, on their husband. They went running after other gods up until an Israelite born in Bethlehem, Jesus of Nazareth. You see, in Jesus, we saw the God who was faithful to His people. And in Jesus, we saw the human who was faithful to God. Jesus reunited humanity with God by dealing with their sin. He modeled God's self-sacrificial, others-focused love to the world for our salvation. But what I want to highlight this morning is that Jesus' life and death were far more than just addressing the past. It was about the way forward. The life and death of Christ did more than just deal with your past. They're paving the way to live. Tim Mackey says this: we are heading towards a new creation where there will be a symphony of unified wills, submitting to each other in love. But for us to move forward, we must become like Jesus and do what He did. Jesus is the saving God who created all things, and He's also the prototype human for all of us to imitate. In the text of Scripture that Sydney read to us earlier, that we're going to be looking at this morning, we're going to focus on seeing that Jesus dying is the way for humans to live. Let's jump into the text, Matthew 16. All right, now in Matthew 16, it's there were no chapter marks when Matthew wrote this gospel, okay? We put those in later, but Matthew 16 is the place we all can go to and find the place, right? I want to alert us to 3 scenes in the movie, okay? So we're going to look at scene number 1, and then we're going to look at scene number 2, and then we're going to look at scene number 3 in Matthew chapter 16. And as is the case in any other book of the Bible, the 3 go together, and if you just read 1, you didn't get the whole thing. You got to read all 3, and we don't have time to read all of Matthew, but you see the point. So we're going to choose 3 scenes in Matthew's gospel, and we're going to highlight them this morning. The first scene is Jesus at Caesarea Philippi. Now, Caesarea Philippi is a Greek name for a city. The Hebrew name was the area of Bashan, or the region of Bashan, and it was where Mount Hermon was. Now, Mount Hermon is very significant in the world of the Bible because Mount Hermon was the place that it was thought in Greek mythology that the god Baal held the keys of death and Hades. Sheol in the Hebrew, Hades in the Greek. This is the underworld. The god Baal holds the keys to the underworld so that when someone dies, their soul goes into the underworld and Baal doesn't let them out. Now, for those of us who have been to Israel, we've been to Mount Hermon and we've seen this huge opening in the mountain where they thought this was the gates of Hades. This is where people go when they die, their souls. Jesus is standing on Mount Hermon. He's talking to his followers, and he says to them, upon this rock, upon this mountain, I'm going to build my what? Church. Interesting thing about the word church. In the Greek, it's the word ekklesia. And ekklesia was not a religious word in Jesus' day. It was a political word. You see, an ekklesia in the Roman Empire was a group of at least 2 or 3 people. And when 2 or 3 people gathered together in the name of the emperor to carry out his decree, it was as if Caesar was there with them. And so the people in the Roman Empire could say, where 2 or 3 are gathered together in my name, Caesar's name, there I am there with them. The ekklesia was a political gathering to carry forward the agenda of the emperor. And Jesus takes this word ekklesia and he says, upon this rock, I'm going to build my ekklesia, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it. What was Jesus saying? This is probably the greatest mic drop in the Gospels. Jesus is saying, oh, Baal, you think you have control over death, do you? Jesus says, no, you don't. I hold the keys to death and the grave, and this grave, this chamber of death will not overcome the church. And can you imagine being a disciple of Jesus and hearing this, and you're applauding, you're like, woohoo, let's go, Team Jesus, we're going to follow you anywhere. Scene number 2. Jesus tells his disciples, now I'm going to go to Jerusalem and I'm going to die. Wait, come again? What? Jesus, you literally just got done saying you're going to overcome death, and now you're telling us you're going to die. And we can all see in the text here that Peter objects. He's like, no, you're not going to die. And Jesus rebukes Peter, and he says, Peter, get behind me, Satan. You're on Team Baal. You're seeing things from a human perspective, not from a heavenly perspective. Get behind me. I'm going to the cross. Now, I think for me, as I've studied the Bible over my life, I've underestimated Jesus predicting his death. Jesus predicting his death is significant because it was a strategic planning. It was pre-calculated. Jesus viewed his death as the reason for his life. And we find out a lot about someone by how they die. And Jesus is heading into Jerusalem knowing that he's approaching his own death. Peter objects, and Jesus says, you don't get it, Peter. At the end of this passage, after the third scene, Jesus has a little line about, you're still going to be here when you see the Son of Man coming on the clouds. They knew Daniel, the prophet's prophecy, his vision about the Son of Man figure ascending on the clouds and being given control over all the nations. So Jesus is telling his disciples, death is not going to overcome the church. You're going to see me coming on the clouds in all of my glory and ruling over the nations. But how is Jesus going to get the crown, and how is he going to get to the throne? How is he going to gain power? And all the disciples are like, pull out your sword, let's go. And Jesus says, no, I'm going to die. All right, now everybody's confused. The disciples are like, man, he just basically told Peter to get to the back of the line. He was first in line. Peter doesn't get it. And then Jesus looks at his followers and he says, okay, if any of you want to be my follower, take up your cross and follow me. what is Jesus talking about? Let's look at the text together. Then Jesus said to his disciples, if any of you wants to be my follower, you must turn from your selfish ways, take up your cross, and follow me. If you try to hang on to your life, you will lose it. But if you give up your life for my sake, you will save it. Jesus is giving his followers the heavenly insight of how to save the world. It's by strategically giving up your life. Jesus' cross is the way God desired to deal with evil. Jesus defeated evil with a cross, not a sword. As the church, as Jesus' ecclesia, as his followers take up their cross in cross-shaped living, they will show the world the way of Jesus. So Jesus calls his followers to cross-shaped, peacemaking self-sacrifice. German pastor who was executed by the Third Reich, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, said this: when Christ calls a man, he bids him come and die. Many of you have heard of the 70 Christians who were killed in the Congo by Muslim extremists this week. And so, while we might not think that following Jesus means taking up a Roman cross and dying, for some in this world it absolutely does. Now, we might have a couple of objections at this point to my teaching. Scott, we love the whole idea of turning the other cheek. That sounds really cool. But what about when someone busts into our house and is kidnapping our child? Like, shouldn't we have self-defense? Good point. Scott, aren't there places in the Bible where God commands violence? Like tells the Israelites to go into war? What about that? Let me say this. I think one of the most important things we can understand while looking through the lens of the cross is that God determined to work in and through humans to bring his plan into the world. God does not bypass humans. God created humans to be the people who brought about his creation project. And when humans rebelled against God and sent the whole creation project off track, God had to then work with those humans to get the Eden project back on track. Are you with me? It was necessary for God to accommodate that which he did not desire in order to get God's creation project back on track. But if we really want to know what God thinks about violence and how God deals with evil, all we have to do is look at the cross. The cross was the ultimate expression of God, of how God chooses to deal with evil. And it was by God allowing evil to come upon himself. That doesn't answer all of our questions, but let me say this. I think we all in this room can agree on one thing. If our first response to evil is, let's nuke them, we're thinking like Peter, we're not thinking like Jesus. The Christian's first response to evil should immediately be peace. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called the children of God. Okay. We're not in the Congo. We're not being asked to die for our faith. So what does it mean for you and me in Fishers, Indiana in 2025 to take up our cross and follow Jesus? How can we actually do that? I'm going to say in two ways. The first way, and hear me carefully, the most important thing that you can do to follow Jesus, and this might surprise some of you, it's to get in that tank over there and be baptized. I think a large portion of the American church, in my mind, as I see it, has underemphasized the significance of baptism in a person's life. When we go and read Paul and see what he had to say about baptism, we see that Paul understands baptism as the way that we die and are raised to new life. Steve Walton, a New Testament scholar, says this. He says, baptism is the opportunity to visit our grave early. It's a chance for us by faith to follow Jesus. And as we step into the water, we step in as the old person with the sinful desires. And we come up out of the water as a new person raised to life, raised to walk in newness of life. The significance of baptism is that we get to visit our grave early and we get to participate in God's new world here and now. Now, does this seem strange to you? Listen to what Paul said to the church in Galatia. He said, I have been crucified with Christ and I no longer live. What, Paul? You no longer live? You're writing a letter. What do you mean you don't live? But Christ lives in me. The life I now live in the body, I live by faith in the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me. The first way that we die, that we pick up our cross and follow Jesus, is to be baptized. Number two, we live out the cross-shaped life of Jesus. Katie Geneva Cannon was a black lady and a woman who fought with her pen during the civil rights and women's rights eras in the middle of the last century. Listen to what Katie says. To die to self is to surrender the ego to the transformative power of God's love, which calls us to humility, to serve others, and to seek justice in the world. As the church models the love of God on the cross, we both show the love of God to the world and give the world a foretaste of the age to come. N.T. Wright says the church is a small working model of new creation. Now, this is kind of a high bar. Dying to ourself and living a cross-shaped life is something that I fail at every day. And I think if we were all honest with each other, we all could say, yes, I fail at that. But I want to say to us this morning that this is the way we would want it to be. We wouldn't want it any other way. What is your life if you're living for something that's not worth dying for? Do you really want to spend your life living for something trivial? All throughout the story of the Bible, it's the person who hides their talent and plays it safe that God rebukes. But it's the person who risked it all that God rewards and that he praises. We could say this morning that the more that you risk for Jesus, the more you experience true life. I was in third grade, and my church had their own version of the Boy Scouts. And I had to earn a badge, I had to rappel down the wall of the gymnasium. And some of you, that might sound exciting to you. For me, I am terrified of heights. And as we tried to decide what we were going to do for a prop, me and Pastor Matt literally climbed what do you call this back here? I know it's called a ladder, but is there a special name for it? It's a ladder. Wow. We climbed a ladder back here up into the catwalk up here. And Matt literally is like, Scott, are you coming? And I'm like, yes, I'm coming. Be patient. I'm terrified of heights. I remember my instructor. He said to me, Scott, I'm in third grade. He said to me, Scott, the worst part is your first step. He said, you have to completely lean back and trust the rope, and your body must be parallel to the ground or it won't work. Now, I don't have a third grader here this morning, but I do have a second grader. Come on, Max, get over here. All right, now I'm gonna be Max's Boy Scout instructor this morning. We did practice this yesterday. We're ready to go. Okay, now Max, remember what we said yesterday? 3 points of contact up the ladder. Go ahead. Focus on what you're doing. Don't think about anybody else. Okay, now when you get to the top, Max, remember what we talked about yesterday? We're gonna grab that rope with your left hand. You're good right there. Grab that home. Now before you go anywhere else, Max, listen to me carefully. Remember carefully, the feet need to be flat on the wall. Okay, if you try to put your feet down, you're going to crash your way all the way down, bloody up your knuckles. All right, are you ready? Feet flat against the wall, both hands on the rope, and go. Okay, good job. Now keep your feet flat and slowly walk down. Don't slide. Move your hands one at a time. Stay parallel to the ground. You're doing great. Now keep going. Don't think about anything else but your next step. Okay, one step at a time. You're doing great. Really good job. Slowly, take your time. You're not in a hurry. One at a time. You're almost there. Keep going. All right, can we give Max a big hand, guys? We had to have my son do it because if there was any injuries, we didn't want someone suing the church. Now, I was sharing this illustration with John Baxter, who's the head of our deacons, before the service. And John said to me, he said, Scott, when I was in college, I rappelled down a 105-foot cliff with my friends. And he said, every time my friend would go down the mountain, John's terrified of heights, he would kind of look down and say, no way. I'll never do that as long as I live. And of course, peer pressure got to him, and his friends said, John, you can do it. You can do it. You can do it. So I'm talking to John, and I said, so tell me about it. And John doesn't even know what I'm preaching on at this point. He does now. But John said, Scott, the feeling when you drop back and really trust that rope, he said, I can't describe it to you. It's just frightening. But he said, before I got to the bottom, I couldn't wait to get back up and do it again. And I thought about all of the people who have never experienced the joy of rappelling down a mountain because they couldn't get over that initial fear. And I think that's a lot like following Jesus. There's some of you in this room, and you're thinking to yourself, I would love to go down the wall and rappel and follow Jesus. But I don't think I couldn't do this. I mean, I couldn't get baptized in front of all of this big crowd of people. I mean, God understands. I'm afraid of heights. God's cool with it. He's fine with it. Like the thief on the cross never got baptized. Like we're good, right? And rather than try to scare you into doing something that God's called you to do, that's not what I want to do this morning. I want to show you John Baxter as a 19-year-old and the giddy smile on his face as he's going down the mountain. And I want you to picture John when he gets to the bottom and he says, let's do it again. That's what you're missing. We spend all this time like asking ourselves, like, is God going to forgive me if I don't do this? It's like, if you just knew the heart of God, His desire is for you to live in abundance and flourish. But if you play it safe, you miss out. It's when you lose your life that you save it. You guys know me well enough to know my man crush, C.S. Lewis. Oh man, my kids give me a hard time on this, but I just love C.S. Lewis. I feel like C.S. Lewis, he died many years ago, but he has that way of writing where you're like, is he talking to me? Yes, he's talking to me. I'm gonna read, this is not a quote, this is an excerpt. I'm gonna read quite a bit from his book, Mere Christianity. Some of you men here are going through this in your Bible study group here, so you'll be familiar with this. But I want to read an excerpt from his book, Mere Christianity. C.S. Lewis says, "But there must be a real giving up of the self. You must throw it away blindly, so to speak. Christ will indeed give you a real personality, but you must not go to him for the sake of that. As long as your own personality is what you are bothering about, you are not going to him at all. The very first step is to try to forget about the self altogether. Your real new self will not come as long as you are looking for it. It will come when you are looking for him." Does that sound strange? The same principle holds for more everyday matters. Even in social life, you will never make a good impression on other people until you stop thinking about what sort of impression you are making. In literature and art, no one bothers about originality will ever be original. Whereas if you simply try to tell the truth, you will 9 times out of 10 become original without ever having noticed it. This principle runs through all of life from top to bottom. Give up yourself and you will find yourself. You find your real self. Lose your life and you will save it. Now pay attention to this last part. This is what I want you to catch. Submit to death of your ambitions and favorite wishes of everyday life, and death of your whole body in the end. Submit with every fiber of your being, and you will find eternal life. Keep back nothing. Nothing that you have not given away will really be yours. Nothing in you that has not died will ever be raised from the dead. Look for yourself, and you will find in the long run only hatred, loneliness, despair, rage, ruin, and decay. But look for Christ, and you will find him, and with him, everything else thrown in. Give me Jesus. You can have this whole world, but give me Jesus. I asked Matt if he would come up and close our series off, and we had something designed that Matt's going to show us here in a second. But guys, I want to plead with you, my family, this morning. Let's not let this sermon series fade into the background. Let's allow this to be the way forward for Hamilton Hills Church to follow Jesus.